Thank you.
Go ahead, Miss.
Good, where are we, evening?
State your name.
Good evening.
It's 8:15 in Washington.
My name is Carrie Wilcoxson. I'm a former CPS investigator. I worked within a specialized unit. I handled nothing but priority one and developed a work reputation for child death cases. Prior to that, I worked with aged out mothers with children that were displaced. And after I left the department, which I enjoyed my time with the department, but after I left the department, then I have spent the last 6-7 years highly involved in reform efforts. I've testified before the Senate committees in Sunset. I didn't even plan on being here today. I was asked and encouraged to come here. I don't have anything formally prepared. And the points I planned on making, the last few people that have testified have really driven it home. The one lady from Houston, though her energy is probably not everybody's energy, or cup of tea, she brought it home. She's giving it to you. She's giving you the truth. One of the things that I do now is I am a CPS case consultant, so I review CPS cases. I get called by the attorneys. I get called by the families. Come in and review this. I can usually mitigate a case in about 1 to 2 settings. That's usually because those cases get there because of miscommunications and egos. And I generally keep myself behind the scenes. I don't normally step out in front in the department's eyes because I fear that if that was the case, then we would only stir the pot more. So some of these stories that you're hearing from the families about some of the injustice, if you will, it's happening. This is what I get called to do.
But hold on a second, Vice Chair Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You stated that the testimony that we heard earlier in regards to the 200 people who had the drug testings, are you stating that that was true? What happened in those cases?
Some of what she's describing with the behavior of the workers and the practices are correct.
So you know of cases where they had drug tests and they came out positive, but they were actually really negative?
Sometimes this does happen.
Oh, okay.
This is why those families, and she's also correct about families being able to advocate for themselves. I can tell by some of the questions to some of the families that there's the superficial understanding of how the department operates, and then there's reality. And somehow we and you all, we need to bridge that gap of understanding. I can tell by the questions there's not a full understanding of how it really, really runs out in the neighborhoods and in the families' homes. She is also correct when she says that a lot of families just don't, unless you've got the money and you can hire an attorney, it's very difficult to protect yourself. It's very difficult. Now, I normally am paid by attorneys. I'm hired by the attorneys. Those are very fortunate families. I've never turned anybody away. If they don't have an attorney, I will help. I never represent myself as an attorney, though. But she was giving you the truth. As I drove up here, I thought, what am I going to give this group that's unique and different that they haven't heard yet? And so I will leave you with this. And it's not a popular recommendation. It's not one that lots of people talk about, if at all, and there's a reason for it. The recommendation that I'm going to offer and lay out there is, hopefully as time goes by we can warm up to it. But it's not popular because it deviates from the department's practice of CYA. A lot of what we're hearing is generated from that function, that operation of CYA. It creates haste, it creates judgments and decisions made in fear. We're going to err on the side of safety. And though that sentiment and that thought can be appreciated, it's also bogging our system down. It's causing, how in the world are we going to police all the families? How? You can continue to hire and you can do the pay raises, but if you're in charge of 65 cases, there are cases on there that are going to warrant your intervention. They're going to warrant your intervention. But if you're distracted by cases that don't need to be there, I could pay you all the money in the world. You're never going to be comfortable with being responsible from taking time away from that child or that family that really needed you and that may slip through the crack. Does that make sense? So the recommendation I have is there are, and this was mentioned earlier, there are policies in their statute in place now and has been for a very long time that allows the department to screen out cases that are not appropriate for their intervention. It's that simple, folks. It's there. They have screeners. Some of their screeners are really good. So why are those decisions being made? Because the department functions and operates on the notion that we will err on the side of safety. It's estimated that 30 to 40% of any caseload falls under this. 30 to 40% of any caseload. Do the math. The average real caseload, not 22, 25, is about 45 to 60. Knock 19 to 20 cases off that caseload right off the bat. Now we're starting to get, pardon me, I'm a little nervous. Now we're starting to get to a more manageable caseload. And if we continue to take all these cases, and by the way, Chairman, you keep asking about the number of calls. In 2014, the department received 600,000 calls. Of those calls, 51% of them did not meet the statutory criteria for investigation. So my recommendation is that we start utilizing the policies and statutes that are in place and that we're brave in doing so, and that we own the idea and the fact that we cannot control everything. Let's focus our energy and our time on those cases that indeed warrant the intervention. What comes in through the front door, which would be investigation, has to come out. Whatever comes in leaves a back door. And so today we're talking about foster care. Our foster care system will never have an opportunity to stabilize if we cannot get our front door tightened up. Period. We've been talking about this how long now? Same conversation. We've got to be brave. And we should not expect the state to be responsible for handling all these cases. At some point, we have to start empowering our families and our communities.
Okay, so what would be the brave part for us to be brave?
Utilize the policies that are in place.
And the policies, but specifically you're saying, you're saying that you think that the agency reacts too much, responds too much, right?
There's an estimation of 30 to 40% of any caseload does not warrant the state's intervention.
And you think that, to some extent, obviously they're not, they have personnel that is well trained enough that they're not pursuing those cases, because the numbers you mentioned are right, that, half of the calls they get do not require an intervention. That's
straight out of the DFPS 2014 data book.
So they're doing that already, but you think that they need to do it more? That it should be less than half of the calls are actually requiring interventions, right? Well,
at least the 30 to 40. They're not doing it, Chairman. That's my point. Is some of your high caseload that lends itself to the turnover rate issue, the very fact that we're having this conversation about foster care redesign, is they're not utilizing the policy.
Well, just to try to clarify, because I think I don't know, the numbers I had are different, because the numbers I've been given, there's 274,000 reports to statewide intake and 176,000 completed risk investigations, which means there's about 100, almost right at 100,000 that get dropped, and we'll get some numbers. But clearly the state is already excluding some of those.
Yes.
What it appears to me that you're saying is, in order to try to get to 100% safety, that we are taking too many cases on that don't need to be taken. And I do think, because last interim I served on the child death, the foster care redesign as well. And I do think one of the challenges, if you try to get deaths to 0, you're going to take kids out immediately, right? I mean, anytime there is any risk, if any risk is what you're trying to go for, then you are going to immediately take kids out. And honestly, the more times we overreact to it, I say overreact, a child death is always tragic, but if it causes all CPS workers to immediately take kids out of overreact and err on caution, then we're hurting the parental rights. And that's what the real balance is, right? You got the parental rights and the presumption of innocence that some of those folks have talked about, and the desire for CPS to cover, not to cover but to get to 0, right? To get to no deaths.
Well, I'll say it.
So am I summarizing? You're just saying maybe CPS needs to back off the less bad cases. I said that really bad. It's late, right?
Yes, what I'm saying is that we need to utilize that policy to screen out the cases that don't need intervention.
But they are clear. But they're already screening out. They're almost screening out over half the cases. You're just saying they should screen out even more.
Even more.
So
we know this. I get called.
Okay.
There's attorneys that are getting calls. You're hearing the cases today.
But those end up being very subjective cases. I mean, those are tough. Yeah.
Well,
that's your opinion is more.
Okay. We're listening. I've said it before. I use the language threading the needle, right? You want to make sure that the kids who are being hurt and are in danger, that we take care of them, and that the kids don't die unnecessarily. I mean, how many kids have died? What was the stats in Texas? 1,000 over the last how many years? Right? Isn't that what somebody said? Am I making that up? Was that yesterday?
Yes.
Was that today? So anyway, a lot of kids have died in Texas. Now, I don't remember how many of those, they didn't make the distinction, how many of those kids were pre-reported. Yeah, had been pre-reported, and CPS had come in front of CPS. That's what it was. It was 2,000 kids that had died, and 1,000 of those cases had been reported to CPS. So at least 1,000 over these recent years that had in fact been reported to CPS.
I would only offer this. I agree that they're screening out. I realize that they are, but we have, for example, in Bexar County, the Children's Courts initiative is to reduce the legal cases by 30%. We also know, and somebody can correct me on this stat, but we also know that over 50% of all administrative reviews, y'all know what that is, right? An administrative review to the disposition, it's a challenge to the disposition of the case, that nearly 50% of those are reversed. So if that is enough, the numbers that you gave, then we wouldn't see Children's Court setting a goal of 30% reduction in legal cases, because there's apparently still a problem, and then we wouldn't still see over 50% of administrative reviews being reversed. So, yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, just real quick. So your own experiences, you used to make calls. You used to go. You were a caseworker. You said you went and worked.
I was an investigator within a specialized unit. I also screened calls.
So would you go visit homes? Would you go?
Absolutely. I was in the field.
And so what was your experience? You felt like you went many times and you were convinced sort of immediately that there was no danger?
Part of my job way before I left my home or car was to get a call out from statewide. This was a specialized unit, by the way, and I would be given a call out, is what it's called, from statewide, from Austin to the worker. And so a very quick rundown on what the circumstances are, a very quick rundown on the report, and you can pull it up on your computer. Then and there, I was responsible for making a decision about whether or not somebody would run a call and go out and check on that child. Oftentimes, those times that I decided against going out on that call, I had to make sure that I was within policy, I was within statutory rights, and that I had taken in the totality of all information. And so, yes, sometimes I did make the decision not to make the call, and I had to articulate why I was not doing that. And to the best of my knowledge, there was never any backfire. So if you're asking me...
Well, you didn't go look at you read stuff. They gave you...
That was part of it. Now, as a field investigator, I went out to the home and made these assessments that you're talking about.
After the initial, you weren't ever one of those that made the initial determination. In other words, the first person from CPS to deal with the case and say, wait, we may have something bad enough here. We got to move on this. You didn't do those, right?
I did do that.
Did you?
I did screen calls, and I also ran calls out in the field.
And how long did you do that?
For close to 3 years.
So, do you remember many times going out there and thinking, there's nothing wrong here, we're okay?
Okay, I see. I understand your question. Yes, there were, when I transitioned in the specialized unit, no. In the specialized unit, that wasn't my experience. When I transitioned from the specialized unit over to the day unit, daytime hours, absolutely. That's when I started noticing this. Why are we running on these calls? Why are we running on this call? What are we doing here? It doesn't even fall within statutory criteria. And then it's a little more complicated than that, but because you take in a lot of information to make that assessment, but it's when I transitioned to the day unit that I ran into that.
Okay. Anything else? Cherokee.
Yes. Ms. Wilcoxson, I have a question. So how long were you with CPS?
Close to 3 years.
Okay, just 3 years. So when you mention problems due to miscommunication and ego, you mentioned the CYA components. Can you elaborate on that?
In what respect?
Well, when you say miscommunication, do you mean system-wide, everyone you met, just certain people, certain job levels and egos? I mean, we all know what that is. I just was curious on, because I mean, we've got a new commissioner, and I think that, in all fairness, I think he doesn't want to be tagged with being one more commissioner that may or may not be able to get to the root of things. So, we've had a lot of good testimony, but you're someone who's, standing up here and testifying. You've been working there, so I'd like to know. So
I'll speak from the role of a case consultant that I do now. I get called by the attorneys, I get called by families that have CPS cases, and I do case reviews on these cases. And oftentimes in 1 or 2 settings I'm able to mitigate the case, if you will. And what my experience has been is that the family and the caseworker, there's been a breakdown in communication. So the family often doesn't understand why the CPS is involved. They're upset, and the caseworker has failed to communicate either at a level or in terms or at all with the family. And so then it's just gone. It's turned into a mess at that point. And then the second thing are the egos. So families, this is again my experience, and I'm being honest. Okay.
Well, I wouldn't expect you to do anything else.
I think, and to her point, I think this is good information for you to have. In fact, I have text snapshots, if you will, of text messages from DFPS workers who have threatened families who are seeking legal attorneys to represent them. And in the text message, and this is to the egos, in the text message it's a soft threat that if an attorney is retained, this may change the direction of your case, and it may force us to go legal.
So when you see those types of things, what do you do? I mean, so to me, I don't know if it's a dereliction of duty, but certainly that's not acceptable. So who gets that information, or does it just keep going and going? Or I mean, who is the proper person, and does that happen, that you go back to the overseeing people, the leadership, whatever, and say, look, this is happening? Or does it just go away?
It's tricky, and it's a delicate dance. I heard you mention earlier about filing a complaint with the ombudsman. That doesn't often work. That can actually irritate and aggravate the circumstances.
How so?
It can upset a worker, it can upset a supervisor.
Well, that's not the point of the ombudsman. It's to be helping the people.
Oh, I agree.
To the deal. So, if it's not working, I mean, if you know that, we need to know that.
I agree.
Yeah.
But when I'm called in, these cases, and by the way, I do my own assessments, I do my own interviews with the parents. I like to think that I don't take a bad case. But please, if you will, keep in mind, I usually have a parent, the parents that you're hearing from today that have lost their children, I'm the last resort. I'm the one that they're calling before that happens. So I'm very careful about the moves that I recommend that anybody takes. And if I believe that filing a complaint is going to trip the wire, I'm not going to recommend it. And that's not right. It's not the way it should be, but this is the reality of it. And so I have to make sure that I walk them through very carefully so that we don't have a situation like we are hearing about today. Now, in this particular case that I'm referring to, I encouraged the family to go ahead and retain the attorney so that they were well protected, and that any and all communication from that point on would be through their attorney.
How do people find you? Is it the attorneys know that you do this?
Mm-hmm.
So it's through the attorney, not the family members.
I've had individual families call me as well, but it's mostly attorneys.
So did you see all this when you were working? Would you have been a whistleblower to bring this up?
As a worker, we were told not to encourage families to seek legal representation. I can tell you that I never told the family not to do that. If I ever told the family, it would have been to the contrary.
Yeah. Have you met with the new commissioner?
I have not.
Well, I think that would be a really good thing. 'Cause you're pretty feisty. I think you would have some good insight. He's a Marine, so he's probably pretty feisty, too.
I hear he's pretty feisty.
Well, I mean, my goodness, he's got a resume a mile long. He's doing this really hard job. He's a Marine. I mean, that sounds pretty accurate. You were out when we had a longer testimony, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, well.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.